I'm Celeste, and this is 10 Minutes of History from the Balboa Island Museum. Today we're going to talk about the Santa Ana River, and the reason that we say it's all about the river is because it really is all about the river. It's the whole reason that we live here today. It's the whole reason that the early settlers lived here. It's the reason that the very first people that walked up from Africa and up to Asia and across the land bridge and came down from Alaska. It's the reason that they stopped here, because of course you always need fresh water, and it was a huge source of fresh water. Today the river is 100 miles long. It's fed by several different sources, but mainly it comes down from Big Bear, Lake Arrowhead area and runs all the way to the ocean. It was named by the Portola Party. So in 1769, when Portola, who was the soldier that was assigned to lead the mission trek from San Diego up to Monterey, he was with Father Crespi and Father Gomez. Then 60 men with mules and provisions to go up there and seek out the sites for the missions that are going to be on our shoreline. They stopped for the night along the banks of a fairly good-sized river, and the day before they have walked beside the mountains. And Portola names pretty much everything in California on this trek up north. So the day before, it was St. Anne's Day, and they named the Santa Ana Mountains. So the next day when they come to this river and they camp beside this river, we have what geologists believe today was one of the biggest earthquakes we have ever had, and they know that from the fault measurements that they can take. Of course, they're all freaked out, and in the month it takes them to get to Monterey and back, and this is his first trek, they have earthquakes almost every day, and it's all in their diaries that you can read. So this huge earthquake leads Portola to name the river the Rio de los Temblors, so the earthquake river. Unfortunately, the soldiers called it the Santa Ana River because it was flowing out of the Santa Ana Mountains, and so Portola's name didn't stick, but the Santa Ana River name, it did stick. So we go on from there, and this river is pretty crazy river, and it's a big river and it flows, and it's why we have Fountain Valley and Huntington Beach underwater a good amount of this time, but it's also making all of this underground water for future farming too. So it meanders all around this area, and then it basically settles prior to 1825 in Alamitos Bay. That's the mouth of the river at that time. Now, what we need to remember is prior to 1825, we have no peninsula. And so if you can imagine anything that we have along our shore off Balboa Island here, there's no islands either. Anywhere you go uphill, like if you go uphill into Irvine Terrace, you go uphill into Prom Point, you go uphill up to West Cliff, that whole uphill is the cliffs. And that's where you would have waves pounding right on the shore right there. So if you stood on those cliffs, you could look down and the waves would be pounding, and created those cliffs because there was nothing to protect it. The ancient ancestor of the Santa Ana River was a big raging river, and it carved our upper bay. So it carved out the west cliffs and the east bluffs of our bay. So a lot of people get confused as to what part is West Newport and what part is East Newport. Just think about East Bluff and West Cliff, and that's going to tell you that's the division right there of the different sides of Newport. The other thing it did that was really important is it continued carving through the lower bay, the upper bay, even though there was no lower bay, it continued to carve out, and it created this Newport submarine trench. Now, later, when McFadden owns Newport, and he has his shipping business inside the bay, and he can't dredge the bay enough to create a successful business, he moves that business out to the point on Newport. And the whole reason he does that is because the survey party of the Army Corps of Engineers at that time tell him that there's very deep water off that point, and so that's where he puts his wharf, because he doesn't have to do anything other than build the wharf, and then you can bring these big ships in there because it's so deep. So really, the river is the whole reason that we are called Newport Beach instead of Newport, because if McFadden had stayed in the bay, we would have been Newport Bay. But once he moves his business to the beach and creates the wharf, we become Newport Beach. So that's kind of interesting to know. So the river pretty much stays the way it is until 1825, and then in 1825 there's a flood, and it shifts southward, more towards Newport, Huntington Beach. And as it shifts and it comes out into the ocean, like everything, if you lose your raft in the ocean, we know everything goes south. So does all the silt, 100 miles of silt. And every time there's a big flood, anything that's not stuck down ends up in that river. And so all of that silt comes out and meets the ocean waves and starts creating this sand spit off of our coast. And it takes 40 years to finish that spit. So from 1825 to about 1861, we have another big flood, and that finishes it off. There's a basin in our old pictures of Newport, and it's right about here. It's not in this picture, but that old basin, if you see it in some other pictures, that was the actual mouth, because there was sand that came over from Corona del Mar that contributed up to here. And so the river came through here, through the bay, and came out right here. This comes later. We pull this out later. So that's how we get the peninsula, just that buildup of silt and sand that comes out there. But the river's still going right through the bay, because that is the river. And so now it starts filling in the bay, and that's where we get all the mud flats that end up being the 8 islands in our bay. If you want a great feel for how big this river was, today, go up to the Sepulveda estancia. Because this was San Juan Capistrano mission land, and we know that's about 20 miles to our south, but the mission was basically a cattle ranch with a church on it. It went all the way up to the Santa Ana River, their property. And so if they didn't want their cowboys to have to come home to the mission every night, they set up a row of about 3 or 4 adobe structures on the riverbed up high. And those were called estancias, because estancia means station in Spanish. And so that's why we have that whole estancia area today, which is named after those cowboy stations. But if you go to that, the one existing estancia that's still there, it's at Adams and Mesa Verde Drive. There's a park, and you can walk up the hill. Just walk past it and stand on that cliff and look across and see how wide that river would have been. It's because it was a substantial river. Let's see. And so 1861, when this finishes, this is about the end of the Rancho era. So Irvine's going to buy the San Joaquin Rancho about this time. The reason he didn't own the bay is because when we became a state in 1850 and the state confirmed Sepulveda's Rancho, they confirmed that he could own it, but they did not confirm that he had the shoreline. So they took that back to the state, which enabled McFadden to then buy it, which means Irvine did not own it when he bought Sepulveda's Rancho. Let's see, so we keep going on until in through, and this Santa Ana River that's coming through is basically going to fill up our bay. Joe Beek wrote a book, and in it he talks about in 1916 when we have another flood, and he said he calls the bay chocolate and oranges, because anything, like I said, that's not tied down, and we're in a farming time at this point. So oranges coming down the river, anything that's not tied down, farm equipment, animals, baby buggies, all kinds of things end up in the bay. And so they know they have to do something about this, or and he said, you could practically walk across the bay at sometimes. So they get together, and they have a county bond coming up in order to do more of the jetty project. And they attach onto that bond another $2,000 in order to create the Bitter Point Dam. And so they go out there basically with farm equipment, and they stop this river. And it's about 38th Street. And they stop it. And so that it will now back through and flow straight out into the ocean, where it does today at the river jetty, which is under the bridge when you go from Newport into Huntington Beach. In 1941, they make the Prado Dam. That's 30 miles inland, to tame this river so that all of these cities don't end up underwater when this thing is raging through after a big flood. A part of that project is that they are going to then cement the river, the lower 30 miles of the river from the Prado Dam to the ocean, which they end up doing. So you know, if you bike up there from between here and Angel Stadium, that whole thing is cemented in. So I know I'm a little over 10 minutes, but I have two more things I want to talk to you about. First of all, what is the water that's coming into our back bay now if it's not the Santa Ana River? That's the San Diego Creek. And just like the San Diego Freeway, the San Diego Creek does not go to San Diego. It's only 16 miles long. The original path during the mission days, if you were going to take off from Newport and walk down to San Diego, you went along this trail. And along that trail was the San Diego Creek. So the San Diego Creek gets its name from the San Diego Trail. But like I said, it's only 16 miles long. It causes some silt coming into our bay, and obviously we do have to dredge occasionally, but it's nothing like it was when the Santa Ana River was there. The last thing I want to ask you is if you can name 3 substantial cities that are on the Santa Ana River and named after the Santa Ana River. So I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, the first one's really obvious. Of course, it's Santa Ana. So the city of Santa Ana is named after the river, which is named after the mountains. The next one that you might not always think about is Anaheim. So Anaheim is settled by basically a planned community of Germans via San Francisco that have bought into this whole planned community in order to come down and grow grapes, which is the first crop that's really grown in Orange County. So they've come down here and they're Germans, and now this city, as you know, sits right on the river, and so they call it Anaheim. So home-heim on the Santa Ana River. And then the last one, I don't know why it's the one that people seem to forget the most, is Riverside, sitting right on the river. So we have those 3 rivers that are named, cities, sorry, that are named after the river. So I think that's a lot. We covered a lot, and sorry I went a little over time, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks. Bye.